Should you be able to enter a museum for free? Should we allow the richest of the rich to rub elbows with the poorest of the poor as they view the Mona Lisa, slack-jawed at what it all means? Or should there be a charge? A hefty ticket price or suggested donation that can help offset the cost that museums require to operate. I have worked in museums for several years now, and the question of what to charge for admission has come up frequently. Museums have to manage a delicate balance of wanting people to come in and explore their exhibitions and programming, while also trying to make sure that they have the budget to keep the lights on and pay their staff. I visit many museums a year and have on more than one occasion shakingly offered up my credit card to pay my adult entry fee that is the equivalent of a nice dinner at a fancy restaurant. Currently, I work somewhere that has a rather hefty entrance cost, but I have worked at other places in the past where we were able to experiment with donation-based ticketing, and the results were actually pretty interesting. In this video, I want to take a realistic stab at this long-debated question, offer you the pros and cons of free museum admission, all while digging into the cultural heritage economy. I really want this to be an exhaustive discussion, so I am also going to be talking about where museums get their money and what they spend it on, and I feel like that will allow us to have a much more rounded conversation about this topic. But as we move through this discussion, I want to remind you all that on this channel we love nuance, and like with most museum discourse, there is rarely a one-size-fits-all application, so just bear that in mind. I ultimately think that there is a solution that will work for many museums, but I will save my thoughts until the end of this video. Before we get started though, please let me know in the comments if you think museums should be free or not. Also, please let me know at the end of this video if this video made you change your mind at all. By the way, my name is Christia, and on this channel I talk about niche historical topics and museums, and I just opened up channel memberships not too long ago. You can sign up, support the channel, support me, it's greatly appreciated, but you also get teasers for these long-form videos, early access to long-form videos, bonus content, and more. So check that out if you feel like it. But first, a word from our sponsor. Karmaclean is a family-owned Canadian business that sources a wide variety of products to libraries, schools, museums, and archives. I have ordered from them very frequently for my work in the glam sector, but they do have lots of handy materials for family historians who want to protect photo albums and heirlooms, as well as acid-free storage options for vintage clothing and antiques. If you work in a museum, or if you just want to create your own home museum, I should mention that they just added a new line of Canadian manufactured display cases, which will keep your items safe from pets, dust, and clumsy guests. They ship everywhere in Canada, so be sure to check out the link in the description below. Thank you to Karmaclean for sponsoring this video. Before we tackle the pros and cons of free museum admission, I want to lay some groundwork and discuss where museums get their money and what they spend it on. I think there is a misconception that museums are kind of luxurious spaces with the best technology and scientific equipment. Those are the museums that we get to see in movies and documentaries, and that's the side that bigger institutions try to show to the public. But the reality for most institutions is that whether it's staff or supplies, there's usually not enough to go around. On top of your general operational expenses that you need to, keep the lights on, you also have an artifact collection, which can contain hundreds of thousands, if not millions of objects. I don't think most people realize how costly it is to not only store these items, but how expensive it is to stop them from falling apart or disintegrating. It's expensive to try to stop the effects of time on an object. For example, one of my absolute favorite historic sites on the planet, the Roman Army Museum and archaeological site called Vindolanda, has pulled hundreds and hundreds of shoes from their excavations. They've been very open about the fact that it cost the site between 80 and 100 pounds to conserve each individual shoe, which adds up when you pull over 400 out of the ground in a single excavation season. Even if a museum doesn't have a full-blown conservation lab, the cost of rehousing artifacts is still quite expensive. Boxes, tissues, paper, cotton swabs, and all the other supplies and infrastructure needed to house artifacts have costs that add up quickly. But the biggest cost by far for a museum is the staff. I've said it before on this channel, and I will say it again and again and again. Staff are the lifeblood of these places. Everything that makes a museum, like the programming, the exhibits, the artifact collection, are brought to you by experienced and knowledgeable staff that make it all tick. It should go without saying that museum work is highly specialized. You generally need at least a bachelor's degree to do anything on the back of house side of things, and because you are so specialized, and just generally, you should be paid well for your labor. Whether you are actually paid for your work is a video topic I've already done on this channel, which I highly recommend you check out after you're done with this one. But it should be noted that most museum staff are not getting the paychecks they deserve. All this to say, though, operating a museum is expensive. So we've established that it is expensive to run a museum, but my next question is, where does that money come from? If you're unfamiliar with the back end of museums, you might think that they just get all of their money from ticket sales, but there's actually a number of ways that museums get their funding. I've roughly sorted these into 4 separate categories, including external funding, day-to-day profit, private donation, and fundraisers. Most museums generate some revenue through their visitors when they spend money on admission fees, event tickets, buying coffee and lunch in the cafe, or by exiting through the gift shop. The revenue from this isn't usually enough to fully cover costs, so usually at least 1 or 2 of the next options will come into this financial conversation. External government funding from government is pretty self-explanatory. A museum receives a certain amount of money every year from the government or the city or the state or the province, what have you, to operate. Sometimes it covers all of a museum's operational costs, but sometimes it's just a percentage or even just like a flat dollar amount. I know here in Canada, there are also grants that institutions can apply to from different levels of government or from other organizations that support arts and culture. Private donations have a very broad range, from somebody just, dropping a spare $20 bill into a donation bucket to a billionaire dropping a few $1 million on an institution so that they'll name a hall or a wing after them. We'll offer the disclaimer that having a wealthy corporation or individual dropping, a few $100,000 or a few million on an institution can be a double-edged sword. And I do discuss this quite extensively in my last video, where there was a fake philanthropist who had donated all of this money to the Met Opera and the Frick collection in New York. And it turns out that that money was not his to give. So if you want a deep dive on what can go wrong with that type of donation, check that video out. With that being said, I still do think, myself included, a lot of museum staff kind of daydream about an anonymous billionaire dropping a few million on an institution to fund a specific project that you've been wanting to work on, or to fix that elevator that's been broken for 3 years now. Large private donations are not super uncommon. They do happen. The Maritime Museum of British Columbia received a $1 million donation from someone's estate, and I try not to think about how much work we could have done at the last museum I worked with $1 million. Because otherwise I get sad. Fundraising. Fundraisers are, I guess, technically private donations, but they kind of have a bit of a unique aspect to them, so I thought they deserved their own spot on the list. Many museums will host a fundraiser for specific projects, like to fix that elevator that's been broken for 3 years, but many others will host a more general fundraiser campaign to generate financial support that will help get them through the year. I think people often forget that the Met Gala, despite featuring a ton of pomp and celebrity, is actually a fundraiser for the museum and covers much of their operation costs, preservation, and all of the other things required to, of course, make a museum tick. The most recent Met Gala actually had their biggest year ever in 2025, with a record-breaking $31 million raised. That is a lot of acid-free boxes and cotton swabs. Now, we have laid our foundation. We know where museums get their money from. We know what they're spending it on. So it's the moment you've all been waiting for. Let's weigh the pros and cons of free museum admission. I want to start by discussing the benefits of making it easy for anyone to enjoy a museum. And I will admit, the list of positive side effects of having free or by donation admission is pretty long. There are a number of social, economic, and educational benefits to society that come from having a more financially accessible museum. And I have broken them down into an internet-friendly, easy-to-digest list for you. Number 1, societal. To start with the social aspect, museums are a great place to foster community. And these communities can be as small as a tight-knit group of locals, or it can be as big as the broader tourist economy. With a lower barrier of entry, museums can act as a third space, allowing even more communities to flourish in these spaces. If you are not familiar with the term third place, it was coined by an American sociologist by the name of Ray Oldenburg. The idea behind this term is that in order to have a fulfilling daily life, you need to have 3 spaces. One is domestic, a second is gainful or productive, and the third is inclusively sociable, offering both the basis of community and the celebration of it. And personally, I think a museum with free or by donation admission makes a perfect case for a third space. You can go to a museum by yourself, or you can go there to socialize with friends, attend a tour or a lecture with a date, or sit and contemplate the pieces of art and historical artifacts. Another pro that falls into this social category is how it has been proven that the benefits of visiting museums go beyond simply providing knowledge. In fact, there have been many studies that share how museums can help improve the mental health of those who visit. In Helen Chatterjee and Guy Noble's book, Museums, Health, and Well-Being, they explore the various ways that museums have created positive, almost healing environments for guests. Some of the benefits they include list positive social experiences and reduced social isolation, decreased anxiety, improvements in self-esteem and a sense of self and community, to just name a few. Basically, museums make people feel good, and when people feel good, they are able to work on themselves and contribute to the broader community. If a museum has a lower financial bar for entry, more people can take advantage of these benefits, and society as a whole is better for it. Now, it might seem kind of backwards to think that letting people into your museum for free would provide an economic boost, but hear me out. My research has led me to 2 conclusions. 1, it can be a positive financial decision to have free admission, but this primarily applies to smaller institutions with smaller budgets. And 2, if you can get into a museum for free and then they suddenly start charging admission, this can negatively impact the museum. Free museum admission is usually less about attracting foreign tourist traffic, though it certainly doesn't hurt. Instead, it's more about trying to encourage the locals to come and spend their free time in these spaces. If you charge an egregious amount for admission, the locals won't be willing to empty their wallets more than, maybe once a year to come and visit your museum. But if it's free, they will spend more time in the museum. And if they spend more time in the museum, there is more opportunity for them to spend money on things other than admission. Generally, when a guest enters a museum for free, this means they are more likely to have money to spend in the cafe or the gift shop. There may even be a membership program that has some benefits that might be attractive to a local. Of course, this does not apply to everybody. A lot of people are living on very, very tight budgets these days. And even if they do enter a museum for free, there isn't necessarily any leftover funds to buy an overpriced coffee or a fun magnet. According to this one report I read by NPR, the director and CEO of the Wichita Art Museum, Molly McPherson, said, "Visitorship is back to pre-pandemic levels, and people are now regularly flowing in to see the permanent collection instead of only showing up for big events, as they did when admission was charged." In comparison, large museums where admission makes up more of their annual budget will have a harder time implementing free entry unless they have other ways of balancing that budget. Let's take the British Museum, for example, perhaps the most well-known, publicly funded, free admission museum on the planet. They do charge for featured tentpole exhibitions, but the permanent galleries are open to everybody for free. However, every once in a while, there is a discussion about changing this, specifically about charging at least some portion of the visiting population. Most recently, in June 2024, Mark Jones, the outgoing interim director of the museum, proposed that national institutions should be allowed to charge overseas tourists admission to their permanent collections. The Cultural Policy Unit think tank released a report called The Value of Free-for-All. The report concluded that charging entry fees to non-UK nationals and residents is likely to significantly reduce visitor numbers, with negative knock-on effects on ticketed exhibitions, memberships, and ancillary revenue. Basically, it would cost the British Museum money to charge admission. Like I said at the beginning, there is no one-size-fits-all approach to this discussion, but free admission has had a positive financial impact on some museums. Number 3, educational. There is a bit of a stereotype, I think, surrounding museums where they are seen as places of wealth. I mean, they hold items of immeasurable value. By allowing anyone and everyone to engage with art and history and science, we can avoid enforcing classist values. If these places are cheaper to enter, it's easier to share general knowledge with the public. This might be a controversial opinion with some of you, but I think that someone living in a shelter has as much right to see their history on display as someone living on a private yacht. And yet, economic barriers prevent many low-income groups and individuals from enjoying these spaces. This also has the added benefit of helping to decolonize museums. Historically, museums were originally for wealthy, white audiences, but museums all around the world are working on how they present themselves, and expanding the demographic of that audience to include everyone is hugely beneficial to that work. If it is easier to engage with history or educational materials, you're gonna have a more informed general populace. Now, this may be a reason for some people in power to want to have those barriers in place, as a less informed general populace is easier to influence. But personally, I think having a happier, healthier, and more informed public is a good thing. Museums are a great way to teach people about history, art, and politics. They can provide tours and programs and new exhibitions and a million other ways of teaching everyone from school children to adults to the elderly. They provide an economic boost and help people live happier, fuller lives. What could possibly be wrong with all that? Now, I have spent a lot of time so far touting the benefits of free museum admission and how it can positively impact society and the economy and how everything's sunshine and rainbows. There are many benefits to having free admission in museums, but in order to have a fully nuanced conversation about this, we need to talk about the drawbacks. Some of these drawbacks, these cons, if you will, I think are more relevant than others, so I have once again made an internet-friendly list for you. Some people argue that free admission makes museums too busy. Now, I have been in my fair share of galleries, packed to the gills with people, and yeah, it sucks a lot to be in that situation. I'm not a fan of crowds, to be honest. I don't think I've ever been to the British Museum on a quiet day. Last year, when I did my Roman Army exhibition review, one of my main complaints was that even though it was ticketed, timed entry, it was still way too busy. If there are too many people crammed into a space, it's gonna affect the enjoyability of your overall exhibition-going experience. And you're probably not going to learn as much as well if you're struggling to read a panel over somebody else's shoulder. There is also this pressure to be quick, to not stop and read everything at your own pace because you know that the next person or group will be waiting on you to finish reading about the object in front of you. This also especially affects people with disabilities. If you're hard of hearing, you're going to have an even harder time hearing your tour guide if there's a school group next to you. It's also very difficult to navigate crowds if you have mobility issues. The list of accessibility issues just goes on and on. We are seeing many of these overcrowding issues come to a head, like with the strike at the Louvre back in June, where staff refused to take up their positions. They walked out, and the museum did not open for the day. According to one CBC article, the Louvre welcomed 8.7 million visitors last year, which is more than double what its infrastructure was designed to accommodate. Even with a daily cap of 30,000, staff say the experience has become a daily test of endurance, with too few rest areas, limited bathrooms, and summer heat magnified by the pyramid's greenhouse effect. To be clear, the Louvre has an admission fee, and there are still this many people showing up every single day. Could you imagine if it was free? There are some ways to fix overcrowding in museums. None of them are perfect, but having timed entries or limiting the number of people that can enter can help to mitigate this. Though the Louvre, and maybe the British Museum in particular with those feature exhibitions, need to shrink the number of people that they're allowing in with these timed entries. I do hope for the sake of the Louvre staff that a better solution is offered sooner than later though. Con number 2. I know I talked about how free museum admission lowers barriers for low-income people, but there's a bit of an asterisk next to that point that we need to unravel. While many studies have shown that admission is definitely a barrier for some people, others have shown that there is the added issue of low-income people not feeling welcome in these spaces. According to Distraction, Blaming Admission Costs for Lack of Cultural Center Attendance by Colleen Dillenschneider, when cultural organizations convince themselves that cost is the primary barrier to visitation for likely visitors, they miss out on opportunities to remove the actual barriers to visitation that are keeping people from coming through their doors. Barriers to visitation that are generally more significant than cost include items such as schedule, negative attitude affinities, such as not for someone like me, reputation misses, and simply lack of content interest and preferring another activity. Traditionally, museums were built for wealthy, white, and predominantly male audiences. And while I truly believe that the sector is making huge leaps and bounds to become more open and welcoming, this is all still fairly new to the broader history of museums. It will take years, probably even decades, to change public opinion, as museum professionals have this uphill battle of trying to convince everyone that these places are for everyone. Free entry does remove a barrier that prevents some people from visiting. But institutions can't just have free entry and expect the masses to show up. They need to go those extra steps to make sure that they are not only open and welcoming, but also to make sure that the experience is worth the guest's time. Thankfully, museums are actively working on things like outreach programs to schools and low-income communities, but there is still much work to be done. Con number 3, the cost of free. As we have discussed, it costs money to run a museum, and unfortunately, admission costs make up a very large part of many museums' annual budget. While I said there was an economical benefit to free admission, I mentioned how this was more applicable to smaller museums, but larger museums often have more staff, more programming, cafes, bigger and more complex collections, and the money to pay for it all has to come from somewhere. There are places like the Whitney Museum of Art where they charge $30 per adult, but that admission revenue makes up 25% of their annual budget. If they were to make the decision to offer free admission, they would be losing 25% of their annual budget, which would likely come with cuts at a staffing level, which means less robust collections care, less programming, and then just generally overall less vibrant museum experience. While free admission at all museums would be wonderful, it's not a fiscally responsible possibility for many of them. Without large injections of external funding, free museum admission is mostly relegated to smaller museums that have less overhead costs. Ultimately, every institution is a little bit different. A method that works for one museum in a big city that has lots of external funding and fundraising opportunities might not work as well for a more rural institution. This is not a one-size-fits-all type of problem. As we have discussed, this is a question that has lots of variables and moving parts. A little while back, I posted a poll asking this question, should museums be free? And I was a little surprised by the results. Shout out to everyone who took part in that poll, and an even bigger shout out to the people that actually explained their reasoning in the comments. But finally, the moment I know you've all been waiting for, what do I think museums should do? Personally, I think museums should be by donation. I am speaking very broadly with this suggestion, of course. How long have we just spent talking about nuance and such things? So, of course, this is still not feasible for many museums, but I think it's a pretty good compromise. But I do think that, if possible, giving people the choice to pay what they can afford or whatever they want to pay with a suggested minimum price, perhaps, is the best option. When I was at Point Ellis House, a very small house museum that's become a bit of a staple of the channel, we switched to this type of model, and while some people didn't pay anything to enter the museum, others actually paid more than the suggested minimum. And we did end up, on average, making more money per person because of this flexible model. So not only did it remove a financial barrier for some people, we also made more money in the process. Again, I'm not saying that this is going to work at every institution and every institution will have the same results, but this, from my personal experience, was quite effective for a very small museum. Additionally, I do feel like having a cheaper museum experience is a great way to build community. I know some museums are having a problem with the broader community these days, and while I don't think that making it cheaper to enter would necessarily fix this problem, I do think it would be a great step in the right direction. I do think that if an institution is capable of trying out this type of model, they should, but I also do completely understand that there's lots of variables and other factors that have to come into this conversation. But I hope I covered everything with this very broad and sort of complex question. But what do you think? Should museums be free? Did this video change your mind? Is there some other model that you think works better? Have you had an experience at a free museum that was really positive or very negative? Please let me know. I'm genuinely really excited to read the comments for this video. But thank you so much for sticking it out with me to the end of this video. Please remember to like and subscribe and leave a comment with your thoughts on this topic. And if you really like this channel, if you really like me and you want to support me and get early access to longer form videos, bonus content, and things like that, please consider checking out channel memberships. They're only $3 Canadian a month, which is about $2.10 American last I checked. So please check that out if you feel so inclined. With all that being said, I hope you have a wonderful day wherever you are, and I will see you next time.